for others who are not able to attend. Awesome, thank you. All right, Seth, you're up.
All right, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat through this. So if you have any questions, feel free to just drop something in the chat. We might have you on mute to ask. There should be plenty of time at the end for questions as well. So we might bookmark some stuff, but essentially we just kind of wanted to do some follow-up with you. Dr. Bonnie McBride should be jumping on here too soon. Let's see if I see her. Okay. But we will just go ahead and I'll kind of do introductions and then she'll chime in as she jumps on board. Okay, so you guys might remember Bonnie and I from a presentation Bonnie did initially kind of on developmental monitoring, the Learn the Signs Act Early campaign. As a reminder, she is our Oklahoma State Ambassador for Learn the Signs Act Early. And I work with her on several projects, including the Early Access Project, where we do trainings on how to do screening and developmental monitoring for autism and general development. And we also run, Bonnie and I co-lead the Oklahoma Act Early COVID response team. So if you have any questions related to any of that, hit us up at any time. We love providing support to people like you who are doing kind of the hands-on work in the field. So go ahead and start off with some fun activities here. This is just going to be kind of a fun little reminder and walking through developmental milestones that we've talked about previously. And we were again on, you guys were kind of going through your plans, providing some feedback. So some of this stuff will be really obvious, but thought it's still kind of a fun way to get things kicked off here. So there's always stuff with Zoom. I've been doing Zoom so much over all this time, and I've got tons of fancy equipment and stuff. But sometimes it's still like we can't figure out how to get the poll working today. So we're just going to do it on the slides. That's something totally going on my end that we'll just have to figure out later. But so for now, just in the chat, let me know, what do you think? At what age do we expect simple pretend play to emerge as a milestone? Reminder, all these milestones are the age at which 90% of children will be doing the activity in the milestone. So that's all right. We have so far a consensus going, but don't just go along with the consensus. Okay, we're mixing it up now. 4 years, 3 years, 12 months, 18 months. And one of the reasons why we'll look at this video is because sometimes, and we'll talk about how this applies when you're actually working with families, now it can be really helpful to provide examples of what we mean, because there's some ambiguity in terms of what is simple pretend play. So we'll show some examples. We'll show one example right here and talk about how you can use that when you're actually working with families to kind of take this a step deeper. 18 months is the correct answer. And here there's a little clip of a little 18-month-old girl, super short. And that's the sort of level. We're not necessarily, expecting advanced sort of play. So there are going to be different, more complicated steps of imaginative play, like some people answered, at 3 years, 4 years. But that's sort of the thing that we're looking for around 18 months. Something super simple, a little girl that's using a puppet kind of as an independent agent and interacting and making noises with it. So I am, next slide. So I'm going to keep the audio off. We don't really need them for any of these. So here we're going to watch a little child and have the question afterwards. So there will be multiple choice. Okay. So in that video, it's a 2-year-old. Which of these best describes the milestone that this child's demonstrating? You can just do 1, 2, 3. An age-appropriate physical milestone by using fine motor skills to draw a circle. A possible delay in physical development evidenced by poor fine motor control. Or 3, a lack of appropriate eye contact. What do we think? Is that what we want from an 18-month-old, or is that a sign of maybe missing a milestone? Yep, no fooling y'all. Everybody's on board there. Obviously, if a child was older, if a child was 4 and they're trying to form a circle and they're, kind of doing the repeated and, not as, detailed as we'd want, that could be an issue. But at 2 years old, she's getting the concept and kind of roughly getting that roundishness to her doodling. For a younger child, we wouldn't expect that much, and we might just expect scribbling. So that would be an example of a younger milestone in this area, is if they're able to just hold the pen and to kind of create marks or do scribbles. So. Okay, so both 1-year-olds in this video are demonstrating what milestone-wise? Watch one more time. Okay, so 1, repetitive stereotype movements indicating possible autism. 2, use of simple language and gestures. A 1-year communication milestone. Or 3, or C, looking around the room to check out things nearby. A 6-month-old cognitive milestone. So 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Yeah, pretty straightforward one. This is an example of there are things that will overlap, and you have to have bigger context for. So the restricted and repetitive movements, which are a potential warning sign for autism. Depending on the context of those behaviors, how intense they were, how much they were repeated, those might be an issue. But for a 1-year-old, in the context of these videos, this is very normal, very appropriate, really good example of the early development. Again, we're talking just 1-year-olds, so they're already starting to use nonverbal communication. So if we're not seeing that, that's a red flag, potential cause for concern. I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight Bonnie as well, because she's on and she'll be chiming in here.
I think obviously we have an audience of child development experts, so we're glad you're all getting the correct answer. But I think the sort of take-home message from this exercise is, 1, it's something you can do with families. All of these videos and photos are available on the CDC website. So it's kind of fun way to engage parents in understanding how you would look for milestones, how sometimes an interaction can demonstrate more than one milestone. So, we recognize that this is elementary for all of you, but I think also the other take-home message I always get is when I'll miss a lot of times when we're doing these quizzes, especially with the older ages. And I feel like I'm pretty good at development. But I think, again, this is what's so great about this milestone checklist and this program, or this, Learn the Science Act early materials, is you don't have to memorize everything. You don't have to be exactly, 100% accurate, because you can rely on the tools to help remind you at what age behavior or certain skills or behaviors emerge.
Okay, we've got one final one. At what age would you expect a child to reach the milestone of understanding what 2 means? Early numeric concepts. 18 months, 3 years, 1 year. Let's see some guesses. Okay. 3, 2. I should have clarified, because it's hard to know if 3 means 4. Does 3 mean 4 years? Because it's the third one. 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. Yep, it's 3 years. I know you can see an example of it's not, we're not expecting the child to really explain, but if they can, look at something and say, how many blocks are there? There's 3 blocks. In this case, the lady was saying, give me 3 of the goldfish, and he was able to do it. So that's our last example of that. All right, Bonnie mentioned I'll kind of be switching between PowerPoint and some websites. So Bonnie already mentioned that these videos are videos that you can use. We'll look at a couple of examples of how you can do that. But just a reminder, the CDC has a dedicated website for kind of aimed at home visitors. So if you ever want to revisit some of the stuff, or if you want to refer your providers or anybody involved in home visiting to kind of see what some of the stuff that you've already learned about and we've already talked about, or you just need a reminder where to find something, this is a great place to do it. Some of this stuff we'll specifically address here in a little bit. Like we mentioned, the milestones in action. This is where all of those milestones from that quiz came from. We'll also talk about how these are embedded in the app when we look at that here in a second. But essentially for each of these, for a certain age, you can click on them. There's tabs for each of the different domains, and then multiple examples from all of the different milestones for that age and domain. So this is a really good example of something that you can, especially for those families, like we mentioned, sometimes the context and what exactly is meant by, simple pretend play or something like that, or if something's not quite clicking for a family, pulling up some of these examples and showing them is a really good example of something we're going to talk about, which is kind of how do you get to a little bit deeper integration and more engaged with the family and doing this stuff, because that's kind of the next step beyond just having materials and handing them to a family, because that's a great thing to do, but it also is kind of limited in terms of how much impact it can have. Okay. So just thought I'd see for a second if anybody has, and feel free for this just to unmute yourself and chime in if you like. You guys I know have already kind of started implementing your plans. Who's so far as given out in some form info about the app, printed materials to families? Is that something that you guys have have had folks starting to do? What's kind of the reception to those been? Have you heard any feedback, either from families or other providers in your organization?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to share how things are going, if you've handed out any materials, or maybe haven't started that piece yet.
Hello.
Hello.
Something that my peer educators have shared is that the families have found a little bit hard the use of milestones. Not necessarily, she didn't mention exactly the materials yet. They like the idea, but just starting to recognize the milestones. When we got to the questionnaires to create a baseline to figure it out how much knowledge they already have, she said that was unanimous that families said it was just hard to answer those questions. Like they really struggle trying to figure it out, and that they also apply it to the specific child that they have instead of looking at it as a general concept, like in children and what time it will be, at what age they will do something. It would just focus on that particular child that we were working on.
That's a great comment, because I think we've heard that before from other group, other professionals that are using these materials with their clients or kids that they work with. So I think we're going to address a little bit of how to approach that barrier as we go through the examples, but we'll circle back around to that, because I think that's really, I've heard that before, and I've really thought a lot about, like, how do you get to that point? Because sometimes parents just don't recognize, they don't understand if their observing a milestone or not, because they just don't know enough about child development. So yeah. So Seth, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another good example of where things like showing them, not just giving them materials, but kind of walking them through examples, showing them videos, things like that. Because sometimes it takes a little while for the concepts to click. And you always have to do, you have to be mindful and try to put effort into kind of understanding and potentially accommodating kind of just individual differences in families that could be related to everything from like what their parenting experience is. Some families you're going to have, a lot of first time mothers. In some cases, you might have somebody who's been around a lot of other children, especially in rural scenarios, and especially even during the pandemic when they haven't really had time necessarily to see their kid as much around peers and kind of get that context. That can be important, as well as even, kind of cultural differences in parenting styles and understanding of development could be issues. So, I mean, that gets complicated, but kind of being mindful of that is definitely the first step. Any other thoughts, comments on kind of how things are going with how, these materials fit in with what you're working on?
My staff has started as well, and maybe the first comment, then maybe Monica or Cynthia could give more details too, but a couple of them just even getting the app downloaded. Some families were pretty quick, they knew how to download things, but very few. In some, they have to really devote time and just walk them through. And one of them mentioned, that after they did the whole thing, but in the next visit, that when they were talking about if she was able to, see some more things, and she was like, well, I have to erase it because it takes too much space in my phone. So a couple, I think, have mentioned that, yeah, I mean, we got it downloaded, but then, we have to eliminate it because my phone doesn't work correctly. And some of the worker was like, what do I have to do? How do I handle this? But others, it has gone well. They got kind of excited about it. Oh, okay, I can, but you come over here and you point out to me also some of the milestones and when they do ASQs and all that. So they kind of use it unless they're new ones. But yeah, with a couple, we have struggled and to just even keeping the app in their phone because they just feel that, I don't know, it slows them down or that they can't do other things.
Yeah, and for some people, I mean, the app is great, and we still encourage people to, whenever it does work for families, to use it. But for some families, it's not going to be ideal, and it's not going to work as well.
But that's really helpful feedback for us, because hearing about how it plays out in real life scenarios is really helpful when we're thinking about, trying to get to this deeper integration. So, my first thought would be, and I know I read through all of your plans that you wrote, and I know those of you that are using Learn the Signs Act early, some of you were kind of focused on the app, or some of you were focused on you just used it broadly. We're going to use the materials. And so maybe thinking about it broadly. So if the family can't use the app, trying the app first. I think a lot of people are, pretty fluent with technology these days, but not everybody. And then also the technology might not be up to date enough that they're using. And then also having the checklist printed out. So having like both available. And I think we'll talk at the end of this, we'll talk about a really great model for a process, because I know for me, when I'm trying to introduce a new strategy for addressing a problem or a target area I want to work on, if I can get a process, and I think it sounds like all of you are training other people to do this or working with people that are going out in the home. So if you can give them a process that they follow that process, that can sometimes help with any barriers that might come up. So we'll get to that towards the end of the talk. Mm-hmm. So those are really, really great. I would love to spend like just an hour hearing people say this worked and this didn't work. And maybe we could do that another time after you try this out a little bit longer.
So anyway, kind of one of our goals right now is kind of just to stimulate kind of your thoughts and kind of reframe things in terms of kind of next steps and where we can all go from here. And our goal really is to get that high level of family engagement. In order to do that, kind of being able to integrate the materials more deeply in different programs is kind of where we're focusing our effort and encouraging people. We also are trying to make sure we can make this something that's not a complication, but something that's complementary to the work that you're already doing. So we definitely want to work through questions about that, because we don't just want to necessarily create a bunch more work for all of you guys and your folks. One thing, since we were just talking about the app, for fun, I wanted to try showing an example. Is anybody still doing virtual stuff with families, their programs? Any families you guys doing virtual stuff? A little bit. So one of the things that you can do, and I think I mentioned this previously when we talked to some groups, is actually having the app on your phone, because there are going to be cases where families just aren't going to be open to the idea of using an app, or don't have or don't have a phone that will run it at all. But there definitely are also going to be cases where, if a family does actually kind of get shown how to use it and gets to try it out, then even if their phone's running low, it's like, hey, maybe Angry Birds has to go instead of the Milestones app. But here is an example of what you could potentially do in terms of showing a family. So this is how I could show a family in person, or obviously here you can actually share it over Zoom, several other platforms that have the ability to connect. A mobile device will also have a mobile screen share. This should work. I'm using an Android phone, but it also works on iOS. Even if you have an older phone, you can actually share it by connecting it through AirPlay to your computer if you have an iPhone. But here's my app with my child fictional. And you can see here, this is an example of what you might get with the family, where they could kind of go through and show you, oh, I started. And for each of these things, basically each age, they're going to get a prompt to go through these different tabs at the top, which are the different domains. And you can walk them through. For each of these, we mentioned those videos, and these are actually right embedded in. So this is actually a good example of how to help them through this, because they can actually just play and see.
So I think, so Marisol, your comment about how to kind of help parents see, or help the educators are working with your families, how do you help the parents see these milestones? This would be a great strategy, is to walk through these videos that go with the age that that child is either has just passed or is approaching.
And so, yeah, good.
Sorry, I was just actually looking on the app on my phone, trying to figure out how to do what you were saying, Said, about projecting it in the laptop, because a good number of our clients are doing really virtual home visits. And a good number of them too, they do have the paper. We gave them the app, and we gave them the paper to everyone, which the paper, I get the disadvantage is that they don't get to have, the rest of the information. And also something that I was want to share. Some of my parent educators were also talking about that it can be confusing when a milestone, it can have a few choices, right, on the age. But I guess just talking to you right now, it just sounds to me like it will be fine, whatever. I guess as long as they get fairly close, because some of the milestones might apply to more than one age, especially when they're getting a little bit older. Does that sound correct, or?
I mean, well, I think the rule of thumb, and I think the app also says this, it is that if you have, let's say, a child who's between 3 and 4. So they've turned 3, but maybe they're 38 months or 40 months, that you would pick the 3-year-old checklist to start with, because they should have completed all of those milestones. So that at least gives you, and you don't expect them to be at the 4-year-old milestone yet. They're working towards that. So you always want to go with the younger checklist age. Does that make sense? So I think that if you can clarify that with your educators, your parent educators, then that might help them. Because then if you know, depending on how close they are to, if they just turned 3, then they should get most of those. They should have achieved most of those milestones at that point. Maybe, you know, maybe there's one missing, and that's, you know, probably not any reason to be alarmed at that point. But I think it's, if, you know, but that's, yeah, so that's how you pick, is, so you would pick the age that's, if they're in between ages, you go with the younger one.
And that's the way you can see, that's the way the app does it too. Because this child I just checked, this, you know, was turned 2 back in the spring, but they're showing automatically the 2-year-old.
Yeah, and I think that also for us, which it might definitely not apply to any other agencies. I think that because we are using some of the questions that OU developed, and we're using it in our PDSA, I think that that's also some of the confusion, because we are not only using the milestones from here, but we're trying to figure out how much they have, how much knowledge they have achieved. And I think the questions are a little bit different. I mean, they are not able to see these on the milestone saying that you should go, you know, for the lower age. But I do believe that after the clarification that you made, we could probably use the same concept, going lower, because that was something that somebody else, another parent educator, another couple of parent educators were saying is, I think they just wanted a specific age, and it is a range. So anyway,
going with the younger.
Yes, so
And
thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things that I heard a lot of the groups talk about when they were planning is that this is a mechanism to help teach parents about child development. So you're kind of using it as a way to track the child's development and be aware of that. But it's really kind of as important, more, you know, to also help educate parents about what a milestone is. And so you may discover that the parents don't always know exactly what age something should happen, but they're understanding that development unfolds in some kind of a progression, and they get the idea that milestones are important, and that their child, and can they recognize milestones in their own child that they're doing right now. So to me, those would be huge outcomes, and in terms of understanding if a parent is getting the message from what you're trying to do in terms of promoting this idea of child development and how to promote it, you know, whatever. So I think, you know, to me, I think you're getting that if the parents are understanding this general concept of milestones and how to start to recognize them in their own child.
This is Yolanda, and I think what we also explain to the parents, maybe the child is not doing it, not because they cannot do it or not are able to do it, is because they had not been exposed to do. So I think the milestones kind of help to say, well, what is next? You know, what coming next? One of the things that I remember years ago about the walkers, for example, and we had some families because they didn't have carpet, they had like tiles, and they didn't want to put the child on the floor to start crawling or walking. So they were using the walkers most of the day for safety. And we had to explain it that it was not so much safe to have the walker, especially when they had the wheels. So, but of course, you know, and it was demonstrated that after a few days, the child was on the ground. Crawling and walking came almost immediately. So, I mean, but whatever you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, and that's where this can help too, because there are going to be instances where families don't necessarily, again, if depending on what their expectations are, what the child should be doing, the child might not have been exposed or had opportunities to develop some of these things. And those are things that you still want to address, but you just are addressing them differently. Because if a child, isn't given many opportunities, for instance, with those sort of motor development skills, like crawling as a baseline one, there's no way of knowing if it's just because if a child doesn't have the opportunity and they also actually have a delay, you're not going to see that. So you don't necessarily want to just discount it, but that's a way that you can address it and encouraging opportunities. So on the app, you can see we talked about that. I was kind of showing you through the checklist, and the summary basically just highlights those things that were shown as concerns or breaks them down into categories. But what I really just want to say is that's where the tips and activities there in the bottom right actually gives you examples. And this is stuff that's on the milestones physical sheets and booklet as well. But here you can actually, add some of these to favorites to give examples that the family might want to try opportunities. But it's basically just kind of examples of things that you can do that will facilitate not only the child's development, but the family's opportunities to actually accurately observe it. So. And one thing to note on the app, you can, if you see up here where the 2 that's automatically highlighted, you can go through, like we mentioned, you're always going to default to going through the checklist that, the earliest checklist that the child's already reached. You don't necessarily expect or want to, focus too heavily, especially if there are things that they've missed. If they are on track and are hitting everything on this one, and you're seeing them multiple times between, you can keep the conversation going is part of the important thing. And so you can actually, if we finish this and there's no issues, we can actually on the sheets or on the app kind of start looking at those 3-year checklists so that they can kind of, and you can engage the families that way, where it's almost kind of a fun, enjoyable, kind of almost a game. You can kind of gamify it in terms of waiting and seeing whenever, that way. We've heard stories where this can be really cool, where families, are excited about, oh, my kid did this thing, and it was on, I remember seeing that on the app or on the checklist. So okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this screen share so we can kind of keep moving. Very good discussion now.
Great, yeah, great comments. I'm going to volunteer Seth because he knows that I do this all the time and he doesn't get too mad at me. But if any of you want some one-on-one technical assistance on how to do what he just did with his phone app and sharing it on a computer, sometimes it's easier to look at something together if you can plug it into your computer. So I'm volunteering you, Seth, for some one-on-one TAs. You can call us and we'll do it. We'll help you.
I would be happy to help with that. Okay, so we pretty much went over all this, so I'm gonna keep moving. So yeah, and so one of the things that we like to encourage too is, and just to be mindful of, is kind of how you're framing these things. So one of the things that has been a little bit of a paradigm shift in the way that we've kind of addressed things, and even the way that CDC talks about these things, is not to especially focus on concerns, but it's all kind of about celebrating milestones and having those moments, because that really helps all parents and gets them more likely to engage with this. In terms of when you go through these things and there aren't really concerns, like we mentioned, going ahead and looking ahead, because one thing to keep in mind is developmental trajectories are different for all children. All children with delays that end up having delays, and for typically developing children. So never want to get lulled into the idea that if a child is meeting these milestones up to a certain age, that it's going to always be smooth sailing. Some kids are going to have things where they have a level of skills or development where it won't be till in development that delays will start to become apparent, or they'll start missing milestones. There are a small subset of kids who actually have some regression in developmental skills. So you always want to be on board with that and not just kind of assume, oh, this kid was hitting all the milestones at 15 months. So we can just kind of breeze through and skip through the other stuff. So yeah, if there aren't concerns, looking at the activities.
Beth, can you share the PowerPoint again?
I can.
Mhm.
I had not realized that I hadn't done that yet.
Mhm.
There we go. Yeah, so kind of walking them through the upcoming checklists after you've already gone through the current one, and then highlighting those activities and things like that. So if there are concerns, really kind of being ready and preparing yourself for those conversations can be good. We'll look at a couple examples of tools for that can help you through that process, and that you can also share with the family to help them through that process. And we'll also talk a little bit about the importance of providing recommendations and referrals that are easy, that don't have a lot of barriers for the family actually following through with them, because we find that a lot, especially if you kind of overwhelm the family with lots of information. Really feeling out where the family is at can be important, and again, giving them really clear steps of kind of what to do next and why it's important to do those things. So some of the things that might follow noticing concerns on these sheets obviously are some sort of formal screening at a visit, if especially if you know that they have a doctor who could be responsive. One of the things we'll look at on this tool is an unfortunate fact that not all of the time are family doctors really keyed into this sort of developmental awareness sort of stuff that we're doing. So a lot of times we do get a lot of kind of, we call them kind of more antiquated, I can't say the word, antiquated views on kind of just, oh, wait and see, or oh, this is how boys sometimes are. But having them talk to their other providers, healthcare providers, is good as well. And then talking to them about options for evaluation for services. So depending on their age, sooner start to public school. We mentioned earlier that there's some good tools, and Bonnie kind of referenced this early. This is a fun tool. This is actually from a center at Boston Children's Hospital, but it's also on that webpage for home visitors on the CDC's on the Signs Act Early webpage. This is a really good example of something that you can kind of use as a reference. And it's just considered kind of a roadmap for that. Like we said, it's celebrating progress, just like we kind of led with that. That's what they lead with. And then talking about concerns. Sometimes you will have situations where some of these, these conversations might come up because you've had a concern that you've noticed that the parent might not have noted, even on a milestones checklist. Sometimes you'll have other family members. We see this a lot. You can get into some complicated situations. We've done that a lot. We've done a lot of screenings where maybe mom and dad are separated and they kind of have different, they have different contexts in which they're seeing the child, or different kind of perspective on what's going on with the child's development. Either one might think that, oh, everything's hunky-dory, and the other one might have concerns. Similarly, extended family members, sometimes that's where the concerns will come from, where they might have a different context or more, different sort of knowledge about development. And then basically, again, this whole path is kind of just walking you through some of these steps. And I think this is also, even though this is kind of specifically a roadmap for people like you guys as providers, this framing in terms of, okay, what should the next step be, is really, really good for how you talk to families about it as well. Because you're not wanting, again, you're not trying to leap across some giant body of water and say, tell them, exactly what's wrong with their child. Think about, their child's, where their child's going to be in 5, 10, 20 years. You want to be taking it kind of one step at a time and helping the family realize, okay, well, what's the next step we need to take? Whether it be something like a screening or eventually an assessment. But basically, again, kind of framing it in terms of very simple, straightforward next steps. this is an example that they give. This is just the backside of this same tool, where they talk about potential next steps and then specific resources. I love this because, like I mentioned, that was previously on the slide, concrete, actionable recommendations for families are so key. A lot of times we kind of take for granted what the family knows, what the family has in terms of time and resources and availability, to follow up with things or to kind of do their own legwork on things. So, for instance, when we're referring to either Sooner Start or to their school district, we want to just not just say call Sooner Start. We want to say, here is the number for Sooner Start. Ideally, here's the number for your county Sooner Start. So they're not going to have to, because that's what's going to happen if a family finds themselves trying to kind of navigate the system on their own. They might get kind of bounced around. They have to call somebody to get the county's phone number, and then they might get redirected to somebody else. So having a specific contact is really good. That applies especially for children over 3 and referring to schools, because from district to district, who the best contact for that is really going to vary. In some cases, just them calling their home elementary school is going to be a great way to kind of get them into that process. In other cases, they might hit a dead end there and they need to actually talk to somebody at the administrative office, the special ed director even. In some cases, the best contact might be the superintendent of the district. So that really just varies. So knowing the school districts around where you're serving is really good too.
And just to kind of add, I agree with Seth. I like this particular process, because sometimes, if a child's missed some milestones, or you're starting to maybe have some concerns, but maybe what you decide together is we're just going to observe the child again for another week or 2. And depending on how frequently you visit the parent, that will determine, how quickly you move through these steps. But you might just say, let's observe, and maybe we'll see this, this skill, if they're working on it at home, if you give them some ideas for how they might, reinforce pretend, simple pretend play. Now, demonstrate for them, oh, I'm going to feed the baby. And, I'm sure you all do that, but really kind of, and they work and they focus on that for a couple of weeks. And now the child's, demonstrating that behavior, that skill. So I like the fact that you can just, the decision might be, let's just wait a week or 2 and circle back around. And then, or the next step is we're going to do a formal screening, which I know all of you do anyway as part of your practice, but you might decide to do it earlier than what you're required to do because you have concerns, because you're noticing these missed milestones. So anyway, so I think a process really could help some of the educators you're working with have a plan for what they're going to do and how they're going to move through this process.
So speaking of other helpful things that are also on that Act Early Home Visitors page, this is more geared specifically at families. This could be, for instance, something that would be great to kind of have on hand, to be able to give to a family, ideally walk through it with them. But this is all framed and kind of geared towards families. And this also gives some really good examples of framing things in order to kind of maximize their effectiveness and getting through to families. So it goes through different steps, from making an appointment with your doctor, completing the milestones checklist, obviously the part of this, specific things during the doctor's appointment and understanding the next things. Again, framing it around, your child best is something that's always really good to do, because you can, sometimes that's one of the issues when parents don't end up being receptive, is that they kind of feel like they're under attack if there's something that's not going on track with their child's development, and it can get more defensive. So this is just another great example. This one, I think, this one's the second page, is just the same content in Spanish, but this is directly linked on that CDC for Act Early for Home Visitors page as well. So like I say, good thing to have in your toolkit.
They're all in Spanish and English. These. these materials.
The other stuff we already pretty much mentioned, okay,
mhm.
with referrals, having kind of direct contacts, and just being able to continue following up. And that's a thing that can be very different for some families too. Sometimes it might take some more time for them to kind of come around to the idea of taking some steps based on missed milestones. That's part of why planting a seed early is really key, because if you've already been talking with the family about these sorts of things for weeks and months, since the child's been an infant, that seed being planted can mean that they're more likely in the future to be receptive to this sort of stuff. So,
Right.
I think that all the programs really here, one of our focuses really, if we see any possible delays, is to connect the family with the services. And absolutely, I agree with you that we need to know the direct contacts or just the go around. At one point, we're having difficulties getting that child to the speech therapist because they have to have the referral from their pediatrician. And then when you send it with the pediatrician, let him know, well, my parent educator, we did this ASQ, the child, let's say, is not, speaking of, we've seen a delay, and the pediatricians were saying, oh, it's not a problem, just wait. So now we know that we just go with, we have a good relationship with the speech therapist, especially the Spanish speaking one. And through her, she just kind of sends him a note saying, we know that this child, can you send me this information? And that's how they send it. So I think that is one of a big effort that we try to connect families, with services, and you just kind of learn to go around for things like that.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point is, we hear lots of providers talk about barriers. So they've referred, one that we've heard from Head Start, early Head Start providers is that, they refer to Sooner Start, and then the child doesn't qualify for services because they don't meet the strict, criteria. And how frustrating, because you can see the child is showing some delays, just they don't show enough to get Sooner Start services. So I think just, in helping parents through those barriers. And I love what you just said, I think it was Patty, about, find a different route to get there, to get the services if you have to. But there are barriers for sure. We know and we've heard. And so I think just, helping them find, okay, well, we couldn't get there this way. Let's try a different route to get those services.
Right. So we still are going to be beyond this question period and discussion period. Again, we want to be available. If you guys have questions later, have specific things you're trying to troubleshoot or work on, or ideas you're trying to develop, so please reach out to us at any point. But right now, does anybody have any additional questions?
This might not be quite a direct question to our PDSIs right now, but on the website, I noticed that there is information about kind of milestones for kids who are in middle school or more elementary school, and a good number for families have older children, not only, like 0 to 5. And so I was looking into it for an app, if they are not accessed directly to the website. Do you know if there's anything in there? I mean, this app is just really going from 0 to 5. Do you have an idea if there's anything else like they could also, something similar like an app, but for a little older children that we can also pass to the families?
Yeah, partially that's a complicated question, because as a general rule, it's not that there aren't developmental concerns or potential developmental delays that children might get identified with after age 5. I mean, it happens all the time. We work with specifically with autism, but we a lot of times see kids who don't get diagnosed till significantly later in life. And sometimes it's it's because there were kind of, misdiagnoses or other things going on. And they never really kind of got to that accurate spot. But in a lot of cases, the way those things can manifest developmental delays, particularly later, are going to be different, and they're going to be a lot kind of, those are usually kind of more nuanced or complicated cases, where even things like, level 1 screening isn't always really great, so we don't, for instance, when we do screenings here, we typically will refer any kid that's, say 8 or 9 or older directly for a clinical evaluation, because essentially if they have reached that point in life without being identified, and there's going to be other stuff going on that's going to mean that you're going to need something kind of more in depth than a screening or just kind of general developmental monitoring to kind of tease out what's going on. It's not going to be as value. So I think that's part of why this stuff, because you really get a lot more bang for your buck with this sort of stuff in early childhood, just because of the way that development progresses during those times. So yeah, I don't really have a great answer. Bonnie, can you think of anything in terms of?
I don't know of any tools like the Learn the Signs Act Early for young elementary. I think, hopefully the school is going to become involved in tracking and monitoring development and how that plays out in an academic setting. I think, there's some screeners that we use for older kids at the 5 to 8 year old range. What's the one that you're using now?
Yeah, the social communication questionnaire.
Well, that's just for autism. Are you talking about autism or general delay?
Yeah, for older kids, we use that for autism, and then for general delay, I'll have to check and see what age it goes up to. It's the developmental profile, the DP4. So that's a pretty good tool, and get what age goes up. We started out using that just for kids who are too old for the ages and stages.
And so I guess my question comes from the families, a good number of families that we have that are immigrants. And so when they have their children here, or when they arrive here, a good number of the children, they are about elementary school, they might have younger ones, but so we didn't have really the chance, not only because they were not in the program, but they were not in the United States. They come from very small towns, and it's really until we see them, and sometimes we don't see them because they're at school really, but moms start telling us about the child or the kid, and that's what we kind of start thinking like, that doesn't sound right, but is there anything that we could do for them? And so that's really mainly where I'm coming from.
Yeah, again, like Seth said, complicated circumstances, because some of it may be just lack of exposure to certain opportunities or cultural differences. But I think that hopefully I would really try to, and you might have to, again, the same way that Seth suggested for the younger kids, get the number of the special services department at that school district and have them call or talk to the teacher about, I'm concerned about his development in these areas. Would you look at it and see if you have concerns? And, I think, using the school resources at that point would be what I would recommend. Unless you're concerned about a very specific type of disability or disorder like autism, then you might want to refer them. Oh, it looks like Helen said, babycenter.com has a milestone tracking program that goes up through childhood. Oh, great.
Yeah, the only reason I know about it is because when I had my kids, I was on Baby Center because they track pregnancy. And then as your kid develops, they continue to track based on your child's age. And it'll continue sending like, here are kind of the milestones to expect, here are ways to help develop. And it looks like I just checked, it goes all the way through early adolescence, I think is when it kind of stops. So it gets broader as the kids get older. It's more nuanced at the earlier ages, but it still has kind of some things to expect and what might be problematic if you aren't seeing it, and kind of socially what to predict for your kid, things like that.
Okay.
And this is Yolanda again with Oklahoma City Public Schools. So Marisol, we use Child Find with our district. If they're 3 years old, and if they're new children, I mean, if they're not still in pre-K, and they will send a questionnaire to the parents. Of course, many more questions that we have in the ASQs. And they will send all the questionnaire and the paperwork for the children. They may not qualify to be in the school, but they may have qualified for services, speech, or any other delays that they may have. Also, when they're older, we're talking already in the schools, the process is a little bit different. I mean, you start talking to your teacher. Of course, you go to the principal and so forth. But I mean, we use Child Find all the time for our 3 years old. So,
Yolanda, you say for 3 years old, they don't have a.
Yes, I mean, yes, they do. They do. I mean, with we refer children to Child Find if they're 3 years and older. Okay, if the children are already in pre-K or kindergarten, still, you can talk to the parents. Can always go to Child Find. That's okay. But since they're already in the school, the process is a little bit different. Where they already attending a school. I mean, pre-K or kindergarten or even upper grades. But when they are not still in the schools and they are 3 years old and up, yes, we go to Child Find.
And that's, I think, Bonnie mentioned sometimes children may have, signs of some level of delay, but not meet that threshold for sooner start services. And that's an important thing to continue follow up with, because there may come a time, maybe even right when they enter eligibility for school services, that they might apply to the school. And so being kind of aware and talking the family through all of those options, just like a child who might not actually, who might get assessed and might not qualify for special services through an IEP, that child may still be well served by getting on a 504 plan. So things can look different for different families. And so kind of.
Yeah. And for older children.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Okay, good.
For children who do not qualify for Student Star, we use child guidance too. Mm-hmm. So we have that. I'm really just focusing more on older ones because just the number of immigrants that we are getting now with older children, it seems that it's been increasing. And so that's kind of what I was saying. But thank you so much I make notes to keep these resources.
And this is Yolanda again, Marisol. Even if the child is no citizen or they don't have paperwork, the school should not ask for anything like that. No documentation if you are, and they will receive the services 3 years old and up. So yes.
I have a question. Sometimes we struggle when we are referring a child and still maybe just 2 years old, not for a autism screening, because we know we've done it and we know it's high, but it's to get the full evaluation. Sometimes you're on a waiting list for a year and the parent gets really frustrated because they go, well, he's going to be 3, or if he was 2.5, it's too long, and in a year is going to pass by, and they're really desperate wanting to do something now because they're going to be waiting a year to confirm that if he does or have autism. Is there another resource in Oklahoma? Because it's so hard. I mean, really getting a full evaluation, you could be in the waiting list for a year.
Yes, it is a huge problem in Oklahoma, but in other states as well. I think, there are some, national resources, Autism Speaks. I mean, connecting the family with a couple resources. The CDC has some good resources for autism if they suspect that their child has autism. Getting started on some kind of intervention around communication is important. So I think encouraging the family to pursue whatever services they can get. So it might be, you know, with a speech pathologist or maybe an occupational therapist, you know, privately. If there are 3, they can go to their school district. Even if they don't have a clinical diagnosis, they can still potentially qualify for an educational category of developmental delay. And some districts are now even saying autism suspected, even if they don't put them in an autism category, but that would give them access to more services through their school district at age 3. So all of those things are free to families and available before you have any kind of a clinical or medical diagnosis. But yeah, it's off the waiting list. In fact, we just wrote a grant, a colleague of who's a clinical psychologist, to try to work with how to increase the capacity of current people doing diagnostic evaluations for other childhood disorders if they want to become you know, knowledgeable about how to do autism evals, because there's just a shortage of people right now that can do those. So we hear you. It's awful to tell a parent to wait a year. It's just awful. So. I have a quick question. I don't know if this is allowed or not, but at the end of your process of trying out your plan and evaluating it, it would be great if we could, if you would be willing, and if it's all right with Helen, if we sent out a little survey to get your feedback on how easy it is or not easy to integrate these materials into your current practice. Because again, the idea is this isn't supposed to be yet another thing, another checklist, another thing you have to do, but hopefully complementing what you already do and giving you more tools to do it better. So the CDC really is interested in getting feedback from providers who are working with families on how that's going. So if we were to come up with a quick little 5-6 question survey, would you be willing to fill it out? Could we send it out, Helen?
What would be great for timing would maybe be to position that survey to occur during the learning session that we're going to have. So in January, they'll have wrapped up this round of projects, and we're going to be meeting. We'll do that same 2-day, one day with COSA, one day with OKC, and they're going to be presenting the final results of this round of projects. And then they're going to be starting in the second round of developmental monitoring and promotion, where they can decide, are they going to adapt or modify what they're doing or change what they're doing to some extent. That would be a really good time, one, to check in and hear how everything's going, but also if you had that survey, we could link it live during the learning session and get that feedback.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. So that's January you do that?
Yeah, we haven't set the dates yet, but we'll definitely keep that in mind and incorporate it and make sure to invite you. Lisa's giving me the thumbs up. So Lisa is writing it down and making sure we don't forget.
Okay, great. That would be really great. I know that, I said, I know the CDC folks would really appreciate any feedback that we can give them. So.
Fantastic. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Bride or Seth? All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you, that was incredibly helpful. And given the length of time and the number of questions and comments, it sounds like this was a perfect topic as people are starting to put together their projects and actually collect data and start handing out the materials. We will definitely want to follow up again as we head into the end of this PDSA round and into the next one. But I will have Lisa send out your contact information if that's okay to everyone, just in case they do have follow-up questions, or if they want to work with Seth around how to show that content during Zoom sessions, things like that. We'll just get them in touch with you.
Yep, anything we can do to help, we would love to.
That's wonderful. Perfect. All right. Well, we're almost at time, but before we finish up, what we're going to do is just have a couple programs quickly give updates on how things are going. Bonnie and Seth, you're welcome to stay on. You're also welcome to jump off. I know you got a lot going on, so totally understand. Have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
All right. So we will shift first to Yolanda to hear how OKCPS is doing with your PDSA. Just brief check-in and kind of go through where you are with your implementation of your plan and any challenges or barriers you're facing right now.
Helen, do you want me to share the screen with my, or is, I can talk real fast.
Probably given time, if you just want to talk through how things are
Sure.
going. That sounds
Yeah,
good.
so I guess I can do that. I normally speak very quickly. So our PDSA this time, of course, is going to be with a child development, and we call Celebrate Milestones Together. That was our title. And what we're going to try to change with this project is to identify children at developmental risk, improve parent knowledge, and promote family engagement. And we wanted to start small. So even if the information that were given to us, and again today, it was very, very good for every single family, but we want to just concentrate it in the ones that when we do milestones and when we do ASQs, if the children are at developmental risk. So we say that the child is scored in the monitoring in the gray area, and of course, if they do it in the black area, that's a referral. And also, they have not been any emerging or achieved milestones observed in a month, and this is based on the PAT list of the milestones that we have in our program. The questions that we're going to ask to the parents is positive parent practice, the questionnaire, and is like if you have your read to your child, if you have limited screen time, going outside, schedule play days, family meals together, or some to your child. That was a few of the questions, and we are distributing, of course, the PAT materials, of course, and also the LTSA materials as well. I believe that some of the parent educators have shared the app. I don't have any feedback how they went, but they were giving information, and I believe some of the milestones they were there in Vietnamese, and I think we use that because we have Vietnamese families in our caseload. The disruptor measures, of course, the parent educator does not bring the materials, or parent cancel the home visits. And we are going to try with those families, like I said, we identified 14 like a couple weeks ago, and we're now back at 17. I mean, we went up 17 families, and we're probably going to find more at the time that we, of course, continue with the ASQs and do milestones. And those are the families that we are recording all the information. I look in ETO, and I think we have the touch point was entered for 10 families. So I think we're in a good place. I hope today, which is the last day of the month, we can get to the 14 that we first identified. And I don't have any other information, so.
All right, that sounds good. And I know Adam was we had some connectivity issues here on our end in terms of trying to get some of the data in and create the data dashboard. Adam, do you have any updates on creating the data dashboard for Yolanda's program?
I do have data. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do have data. I'm in the process of putting together Yolanda's dashboard.
Perfect.
So
all right.
that should be sent out this week.
Okay, perfect. So Yolanda, you should receive that hopefully by the end of this week. And then if you have any questions or issues with the data and what you're seeing, just let us know. Okay. Then we'll switch over to Frontline. Let's see. Pretty sure you're still on. Yeah.
I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Our SMART aim was to, by January 2022, we were going to change, to hopefully to have a 10% of a parent's attitudes on developmental monitoring for the index child. So we were going to be hopefully from negative to positive, or the parents have a more of a positive attitude by using our child development materials. The first visit, the parent educators went out and provided the child development survey. And on our survey, we had questions like, do you agree that it is important to keep track of your child's development? Do you agree that you have no concerns about the development of your child? And those are some of the questions that we asked. We had 14 families to complete so far the pre-survey. With one of our questions, like, do you agree that it is important to keep track of your child's development? We were showing that 4.54 was the average for that question, and the families, you know, they felt like it was important to keep track of their child's development. So that was kind of like in the positive attitude part. And then our question number 2, like, do you agree that you have no concerns about the development of your child? It was showing 1.67 was like the average, and that the families had no concerns about the development. And I know earlier when we were listening to the speakers, they were talking about, you know, maybe parents are not just really familiar with the different milestones. So I'm wondering if that had some influence on, you know, our result with this question. Question number 3, it says, do you agree that the CDC developmental checklist improves your knowledge of child development? And it was showing really positive because our average was like 4.14%. So it was up in the positive. We haven't really experienced any disruptors right now because, like I said, it was our pre-survey. They will be administering this survey twice. So hopefully at the end of this cycle, we'll do the post. And so hopefully our outcome would be more positive. And like right now, we're in the neutral kind of area. Did you want me to share that graph or?
If you have it ready to pull up, that would be great to show.
Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. So this is our graph, and that's what I was talking about earlier with the different questions on the pre-survey. And as you can see, it was 3.5, and we're like right here in this area of being positive. So, and our goal is, our SMART aim is 10%. So hopefully we can increase that by the end of this cycle. So, is Yachi on here? Did she want to add on?
Yachi, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I see it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Deidre. This is fantastic. Really appreciate you sharing.
Thanks.
And the last group that we'll hear from today, Parent Promise, Shauna.
Hello. Okay, so I'll run right through this. So we called ours Triple P. Our SMART aim is to increase the amount of times per week positive parenting practices are utilized within our families that are enrolled, and we want to up that by 15%. So yeah, the driver is to increase family involvement in the child development. So we're measuring by entering surveys into ETO, and we're conducting the survey at every visit, so bi-weekly. And we just ask our families, how many days a week have you done mealtime activities? How many days a week have you read or told stories with your children? How many days a week do you go outside with your kids? And just a general, how many days a week do you play with your child? So we also, one of our process measures are to give our families the handout and let them choose the positive practices that they want to focus on, that maybe they see they lack and they would like to increase that. And then our PEs providing those materials. There is the time when we have families that are like, yeah, I don't really care. So we make sure that the PEs just kind of use their knowledge of the families and kind of what they notice. And then they will pick those activities to kind of up with the families. Our disruptor measures are conflicting family schedules. So that's if mom works day, dad works nights, vice versa. The parents' unwillingness to change, family conflicts, and that's kind of a general, just relationship issues, mental health concerns, just overall illness, the child's unwillingness to participate. And then we have an other category. I did notice on our latest thing that Andrew puts together that I feel like we have a lot of others. So we may have to kind of try to pinpoint what those are. Because I feel like we have a pretty lengthy list to be getting a lot of others. But so what we're doing, like I said, is we're just handing out those handouts to all of our families and kind of letting them look over and decide what they would like to improve in their household. My charts, Andrew, this time are getting confusing again, but we started with just the baseline and we've gotten quite a few returned. Andrew, you can take over because I don't understand what I'm going to say about this.
Sure. Let me go ahead and share the dashboard that I think you're trying to describe.
Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, absolutely. So this is the headline graph for PAT. This is what kind of started off describing. We want to, we ask parents how many days a week you engage in any of these 4 activities: meal times together, playing together, outdoor activities, or reading or telling stories. And we get the average of all 5 of those for each visit. And then for each of our clients, we're going to get an average of that score on their first and their most recent visit. And we're going to compare the two. And the hope is to see a 15% increase in comparing everyone's most recent PDSA, most recent average score on all those items to their first. So we're hoping to see a score at the moment of 5.4 days a week, an average of almost 5.5 days a week across those 4 items. This is our distribution so far. And what I'm seeing here is we've got a lot of individuals here who've gotten that first visit. They've gotten 1 survey, and we've got that first PDSA, that first measure of their positive parenting practices. Looks like not that many have received a subsequent survey. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you, Shauna, with your, or if that makes sense to you or your data entry folks, but it does look like maybe a lot of folks are getting that first visit, but maybe not a subsequent visit, or at least getting data from that first visit, but maybe not subsequent visits. Or if they are, maybe they haven't been entered yet. I'm not quite sure. So this is that graph of those individual mealtime. This is the graph of the average score of each of those individual items across time. We are seeing mealtime activities getting cited a lot, which makes sense. The one that is used, we're seeing the least often, are outdoor activities, which again, I think kind of makes sense. It requires a lot more input. It requires having a place to go outside, and it requires having the free time to make that excursion. This is our graph of how often families report obstacles for any of these activities. And like Shonda said, the one we see most often is other. So whatever we've got several options here. Could be the child is unwilling, maybe it's mental health, we've got conflicting schedules, family conflict, fewer outdoor spaces available, and that's unique to the item about how often do you engage in outdoor playtime activities. But the one we see most often is other. So there's something in here that we're not catching with these other categories. And a close second looks like parent caregiver is just unwilling. For the process measure, we're seeing a flat line, and here I think this might be my fault. I might have also I was trying to be too clever with this graph. So you've got an item where we ask families, do you have a preferred focus? Do you want to focus on mealtime activities? Do you want to focus on storytime activities? And then another item where we ask, okay, did the PE bring items that match up with that family's focus? And there's a time lag there. We tried to look at, okay, what is the if you look at what materials did a PE bring for this visit, and we say, okay, does that match up with the focus the family gave us on their last visit? But the result is that everyone's first visit, their preferred activity is going to show up as unknown, because we're not going to find a visit before their first visit. But it's staying at unknown across the board, and I would expect there to be some deviation in this, some variance in this, because some people have had multiple visits, but we're not seeing it. So this could be, again, it could be that another data entry problem. It could well be that maybe I got to try to get too clever with the code for this graph. That's what I have for the moment.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, Shauna, for presenting. We are going to wrap up now. In terms of upcoming meetings and calls, we'll have another Learning Collaborative wide call in October. At that time, we're going to have a presentation from the Tribal Home Visiting Program that's part of Administration for Children and Families. They're going to be presenting some of the work they're doing on developmental monitoring and promotion, and talk through what lessons learned, best practices, and also how to think about culture and adaptations of materials. Sorry, it is really loud. I don't know what they're doing in your office, David, but they're installing something and it sounds like they're drilling right through the wall. So they'll be coming to, I know you're not there, but I get to sit and listen to it. I think they're going to just poke a hole pretty soon. Anyway, so they'll be presenting next month at our October call. Lisa will be sending a doodle poll around indicating times and dates, not for that call. That call's already been set and she'll be sending out that information, but there's also going to be rounding calls. So we have, let's see, LCDA, PCCT, PAT, North Care, PCCT Safe Care, and CREO slated for rounding calls. So Lisa will be reaching out to you. I'll send her that list of programs. Lisa will reach out to you about scheduling a rounding call to check in and get progress on your projects. And then we'll all meet in October and have some of you present, and we'll let you know who will be presenting as well. And that is everything. Any last minute questions or comments before we wrap up for today? All right, well, thank you so much for being here. It was great to hear everybody's discussion around the ACT Early materials, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.